Democrat panic mode. Pam Bondi just ends. Letitia James Homan blows her career. She's done. The sun was high above Newark, but inside the Delaney ICE Detention Center, the air was thick with unease. A line had been crossed, not by migrants or agents, but by the very people who swore to uphold the law. Tom Homan stood in the Department of Homeland Security's operations room, arms folded, eyes locked on the live feed. Cameras zoomed in on a protest forming outside the facility. What started as chants and colorful signs was turning into something else, something calculated. "Sir, they're crossing the perimeter," a junior analyst called out. Tom didn't blink. He watched Raz J. Baraka, mayor of Newark, approach the fencing. Behind him, a small but vocal crowd cheered. L. Monica Massiver, a congresswoman with a flair for performance, held up her phone, streaming it all. "Keep it on me," Baraka said to the camera crew. "I want America to see what defiance looks like." "Ma'am," an ICE officer warned McIver, "this is federal property. You need to step back." McIver didn't just ignore him. She shoved the officer with both hands. Then came the handbag. A heavy swing struck his chest. Gasps from the crowd. Phones up. Hashtags ready. Tom Homan stepped forward. Strike one. Within minutes, Baraka had torn up a formal federal warning and thrown it in the grass. He stared directly into a DHS drone camera and declared, "This land belongs to Newark, not the dogs of Trump." That was the second violation. The third came when he led the crowd through the open gates. Back in Washington, Attorney General Pam Bondi raised her eyes from a folder. "Do it by the book," Tom said, his voice low, "but do it hard." Across the country, U.S. Marshals were already assembling. At 3:14 p.m., under the flashing heat of Newark's sun, the gates opened again, this time not for protesters. Marshals moved swiftly. Alina Habba, the lead federal prosecutor on scene, walked in behind them. "Mayor Baraka," one marshal said, cuffs in hand, "you're under arrest for criminal trespassing, federal obstruction, and interference with immigration enforcement." Baraka blinked, then smirked. "You're arresting a sitting mayor," Alina stepped in. "No," she said. "We're arresting a man who thought he was untouchable," McIver shouted into her live stream. "This is political theater." Alina didn't flinch. "Take them both." In the DHS control room, Tom Homan turned to the room. "If they walk onto federal ground without permission," he said, "they don't walk out without consequences." The silence that followed wasn't surprise. It was a verdict. But this was only the beginning. Back in Washington, the footage went viral, 3 camera angles. One direct hit, Baraka in cuffs stomped on a congressional subpoena and screamed into the lens, "If Trump thinks he can crush my city with ice, he'll have to bury it with me." Tom Homan watched it play on loop. "Get me Mike Johnson," he said. The call went through in 30 seconds. "You saw it?" Tom asked. "Everyone saw it," Johnson replied. "We need a hearing," Tom said. "Not next week, not after recess, now." On what grounds? Tom's voice dropped to steel. A sitting mayor declared open rebellion against the United States government on camera. Pause. Done. By sunrise the next day, room 226 of the Rayburn House office building was being prepped for emergency congressional testimony. Outside, reporters swarmed. Inside, subpoenas were issued. Tom didn't want spectacle. He wanted justice. The Capitol buzzed with a pulse not felt since the impeachment days. Reporters clustered like bees around room 226 of the Rayburn House office building. Security doubled. Phones off. Cameras everywhere. Inside, Tom Homan stood at the center of the storm. He wasn't a senator or a judge. He was the man whose name had become synonymous with border enforcement. And now his war was coming home. Pam Bondi entered the chamber in silence, her steps deliberate. She carried a leather folder embossed with the seal of the Department of Justice, eyes locked with Homan's. No words, just understanding. Across the city, another name surfaced, Letitia James, subpoenaed. The grand jury demanded answers for her alleged shielding of immigration offenders and refusal to honor ICE detainers. Tom had predicted it. She turned prosecutorial discretion into a political weapon, he'd told the liaison. Now, the law answers back. The hearing opened with House Speaker Mike Johnson presiding. He didn't waste time. This session is convened to address the defiance of federal law by elected officials, beginning with the events in Newark. Tom was first to testify. He rose without paper. "This isn't about politics," he said, voice even. "This is about a mayor who led an illegal breach of federal property and encouraged assault on officers of the United States. He let the silence work. 3 warnings were issued. 3 were ignored. The breach was documented from multiple angles. Then came the assault. And then," he paused, "came the symbolism. Screens behind him lit up with the image Ras Baraka mid-stomp crushing the subpoena. Let me be clear," Tom continued. "He didn't destroy a piece of paper. He destroyed the premise that no one is above the law." Whispers rippled through the chamber. Cameras zoomed in. The press pool scribbled. The next clip rolled MacIver shoving an ICE officer, swinging her handbag like a warhammer, screaming live to her followers. "She called it protest," Tom said. "We call it a felony." Letitia James's name was next. A second screen flicked on, showing internal memos redacted, encrypted, and then decoded. Pam Bondi stepped up. "These communications indicate strategic interference with immigration enforcement in New York," she said, sliding the documents across the table. "Selective prosecution, suppression of ICE warrants, and in one case, destruction of internal tracking data," Letitia's attorney objected. "This is a political witch hunt." Mike Johnson overruled him. Pam continued, "The DOJ is not here for politics. We are here for accountability. A badge is not a shield from the law." Tom leaned forward again. This wasn't chaos, it was choreography. Timed, rehearsed, streamed, designed to provoke and defy. Baraka, now in D.C. under supervision, sat stone-faced at the witness table. His mic was live. "I stood up for my city," he said. "Not for ICE, not for tyranny." "You stood on federal ground and declared rebellion," Tom replied. A beat. Pam Bondi opened her folder. "Pursuant to Title 18, Sections 111 and 1507, the Department of Justice formally charges Mayor Ras J. Baraka with criminal trespass, obstruction, and contempt of Congress." Click. The folder closed. The chamber was still. Baraka didn't speak. MacIver sat next to him, arms folded, lips pressed. Cameras froze. Reporters leaned forward, waiting for a reaction. None came. Tom turned to the committee. "We didn't seek this confrontation. They brought it to us, and now we answer." A pause. Then the gavel came down. "We will reconvene tomorrow at 8:30. Testimony from federal ICE officers will follow." Tom stepped back from the mic. Justice had started. And it wouldn't stop here. At precisely 8:30 a.m., the hearing room filled again. The room was sharper this time, quieter. The kind of quiet that meant witnesses were coming. First up, Special Agent Marcus Reeve, ICE veteran. He walked in uniformed and unshaken, sworn in, sat straight, described the events at the Delaney facility Johnson instructed. Reeve didn't dramatize. "We issued 3 lawful orders to disperse, all ignored. Officer Ramirez was assaulted by Congresswoman McKeever. His vest absorbed the blow, but he was bruised and later treated for a concussion. The incident was captured on 3 separate devices, including the officer's body cam." A screen lit up, the impact played on loop. Gasps broke out. "Did the officer retaliate?" "No, sir. He followed federal use of force protocols." Tom Homan watched silently. The room was on edge, not because the evidence was shocking, but because it was inescapable. Reeve continued. "Mayor Baraka led the crowd onto ICE-controlled land. He dismissed orders and engaged in verbal threats. His actions emboldened unlawful entry." Pam Bondi leaned in. "Was there any resistance from federal agents during the arrest?" "None. The response was measured, peaceful, and documented." Next, another witness, Maria Ochoa, a DHS analyst. She wore dark glasses, spoke with calm. "Our intelligence monitoring systems intercepted encrypted planning messages between organizers tied to Baraka's office and activist cells in Philadelphia. They choreographed the timing of the breach to align with national media coverage." Tom nodded slightly. "Proof it wasn't spontaneous," he whispered. The chairman pressed. "What kind of coordination are we talking about?" Maria tapped her tablet. "They used a layered broadcast strategy. MacIver's live stream reached 2.7 million views within 4 hours. They had signage, pre-printed narrative points coordinated, and media feeds staged." Mike Johnson leaned back. "So what we witnessed wasn't civil disobedience. It was theater." Maria said nothing. She didn't need to. A hush fell as Letitia James was summoned. The New York Attorney General entered the room in gray. Not defiant, not meek, just calculated. Her counsel sat beside her. She was sworn in. "Ms. James," began Johnson, Why did your office choose not to honor ICE detainers for over 600 cases involving known immigration violators? She inhaled. Because ICE's enforcement in New York was politically motivated and structurally biased. We were protecting our judicial sovereignty. Pam Bondi stood. That's not legal grounds, that's political rationalization. Letitia raised her voice slightly. We do not exist to rubber stamp federal overreach. Tom stepped forward. No. You exist to uphold the law, not interpret it selectively. He held up a document, ICE detainer logs, stamped and rejected with boilerplate denials. These rejections weren't case-based. They were blanket dismissals. Letitia remained stone-faced. Tom continued. 2 of those released went on to commit violent offenses. 1 involved the stabbing of a federal witness. Gasps. Some in the gallery covered their mouths. Do you still call that sovereignty? Letitia responded. I call that tragic. Not criminal, Mike Johnson pressed. Ms. James, were you or any member of your staff in contact with Baraka's office before or during the Newark incident? A long pause, then no direct contact. Pam Bondi slid forward a printed transcript. The committee possesses evidence of indirect communication through encrypted channels between legal advisors from your office and protest coordinators in Newark. Do you deny this? Letitia paused again. I have no knowledge of that, she said flatly. The room tensed. Outside, news alerts exploded. James denies encrypted ties to Newark uprising. DHS presents explosive testimony. May Ivor video hits 5 million views. Inside, Tom remained centered. He turned to Johnson. Let's not allow this to be lost in drama. Let's remember what happened. An elected official stomped on a subpoena. A congresswoman struck a federal officer, and a state AG may have colluded to block federal law. These aren't hypotheticals. They're charges. Johnson nodded. Final witness for the day, he said. Officer Ramirez. The man entered in a neck brace. The room quieted. He took the oath. Looked up, jaw set. Did you feel provoked? Officer Johnson asked. Yes, but I also felt filmed. And I knew if I reacted, it wouldn't be a defense. It'd be fuel. And what did you feel when Congresswoman McIver hit you nothing? He said. Not pain, just confirmation. Confirmation that this wasn't about protest, it was about performance. Silence. Pam Bondi stood. Tomorrow, we will issue formal recommendations. Johnson closed his folder. And we vote on whether this becomes a federal referral. The hearing was adjourned. But the reckoning had only begun. The next morning, the air inside the Rayburn hearing chamber was noticeably heavier. It wasn't tension, it was certainty. Today wouldn't be about gathering information. Today was about drawing lines. The room filled earlier than scheduled. Members of Congress showed up with annotated folders and legal aids in tow. Tom Homan stood by the window watching the sunrise cut through the marble lines of the Capitol. Next to him, Pam Bondi reviewed her final statement, sharp, precise, and devastating. Are we ready? She asked. We were ready the moment Baraka stomped on that subpoena, Tom replied. At 9:00 a.m., Mike Johnson brought the hearing to order. Yesterday we heard testimony from officers, analysts, and accused officials. Today we move into formal deliberation. But before we do, we will review the sequence of violations and legal context. The first screen lit up. A timeline appeared May 8th, 11:03 a.m. to 4:17 p.m. Split-second precision. 3 warnings, 2 assaults, 1 unlawful breach. Tom stood. Let me walk you through the timeline that led to this chamber. He pointed to the first frame. This is the initial notice given to Baraka, read aloud, documented, and delivered by hand. Click. The next slide showed Baraka waving it off with a smirk. Second notice ignored, third notice torn and thrown to the grass. Click. Then the breach. And then the act of contempt, a subpoena stomped into the pavement while he shouted, "Bury ICE with me." Mike Johnson's voice cut in. This is no longer about personal ideology. This is about public defiance of federal authority. Pam Bondi took the podium. Under Title 18, we now consider the totality of the acts criminal trespass, obstruction of law enforcement, and willful defiance of congressional authority. She turned toward the defense table. Mayor Baraka. Do you wish to speak? Baraka stood, calm, controlled. This hearing is the latest act in a long play of political retaliation. You treat resistance as rebellion and protest as felony. Pam raised an eyebrow. Do you deny stepping onto federal property after 3 warnings? I don't deny being there. I deny that it was a crime. Do you deny encouraging your supporters to join you? I encourage them to witness injustice. Click. The screen behind them flickered. Baraka waving people forward, cameras rolling. Do you deny destroying a congressional subpoena in defiance? Baraka hesitated. I rejected it. Publicly. Tom Homan rose. You didn't reject it, you stomped on it. That distinction matters here. Baraka smirked, then fell silent. Letitia James was next. You have the right to remain silent, Johnson said, but the committee has specific questions. Letitia nodded. I will answer. Did your office communicate indirectly with organizers of the Newark incident not knowingly? Were your policies designed to frustrate federal enforcement? They were designed to protect due process. Tom interjected. 2 ICE fugitives released under your policy committed violent crimes. One stabbed a federal cooperating witness. Letitia's voice cracked. That was not a foreseeable consequence. Pam countered, but it was an avoidable one. Another screen came on a document dump annotated with redacted messaging between legal teams and organizers. Encryption logs, IP tracking, coordinated timestamps. Johnson leaned forward. We are looking at evidence of subversion of federal enforcement. Letitia stared at the floor. The hearing paused for deliberation. 20 minutes later, the committee reconvened. Mike Johnson stood. This chamber now moves to formal recommendation. Pam read aloud. Letitia James referred for investigation for obstruction of federal process and potential conspiracy to frustrate lawful enforcement. L. Monica Maysiver referred for federal assault obstruction and incitement of illegal action on federal property. Ras J. Baraka referred for contempt of Congress, federal trespassing incitement, and obstruction. Gasps. Cameras clicked. Tom stepped forward, voice low but clear. This isn't vengeance. This is preservation. If we let one mayor become law-proof, then no border, no court order, and no agency is safe. Johnson brought down the gavel. The Department of Justice has its referrals. Our role is complete. Now the law must take its course. Outside, the streets of D.C. rumbled not with violence, but with reactions. Protesters and supporters clashed in front of the Capitol steps. Cable news shows broke programming. Editorials were already being written. Inside a quiet hallway, Tom Homan met Pam Bondi by the exit. This will get louder, she said. It's supposed to, he replied. Truth usually does. The headlines hit before the ink dried on the referrals. By noon, every network had cut into programming. DOJ to investigate top New York. Prosecutor Mayer referred to federal court for obstruction. Congress declares open rebellion from within. But Tom Homan didn't watch the coverage. He had a meeting. In a secure conference room within the Eisenhower Executive Office building, he sat across from Homeland Security Secretary Elena Frey and acting White House counsel Harris Dunn. What you started yesterday triggered a political firestorm, Harris said, arms folded. I didn't start it, Tom replied. I documented it. Elena nodded. The president's standing by it. He's not backing down. But we're expecting coordinated protests in over 30 cities by nightfall. Tom didn't flinch. Then we brief icy field offices. No aggression, only enforcement. The law's our armor. We wear it clean. Do we have legal cover? Harris asked. Tom turned to a folder on the table. 3 video angles subpoena destruction encrypted communications from a state official's office. If that's not legal cover, we don't have a republic. Back on the Hill, Pam Bondi met with DOJ prosecutors to finalize the filings. Her language was surgical. This isn't about Baraka's politics, she said. It's about his refusal to comply with federal law. McIver didn't protest, she assaulted. James didn't reform, she obstructed. The indictments were drafted, federal agents were briefed, warrant teams stood ready. At 3:47 p.m., Letitia James stepped onto the steps of the New York State Supreme Court to address the press. This is not justice, she said. This is retaliation disguised as reform, and I will not be intimidated by federal overreach. But behind her, reporters received live DOJ filings. Her name, the charges, the evidence log. The questions shifted fast. Ms. James, are you denying encrypted communications occurred? Did your office coordinate with protest planners in Newark? Will you comply with the subpoena issued by the House Committee? She didn't answer. She walked off. Meanwhile in Newark, Baraka returned to City Hall, not to resume duty, but to address the public. I told them I would not kneel to federal thugs, and I won't, he shouted to the crowd. Let them bring indictments. We'll bring a movement. But inside the building, a U.S. Marshal handed his chief of staff a sealed envelope, a federal summons, court date 10 days. At 5:22 p.m., McIver posted a defiant live stream. "I'm being criminalized for caring," she said, "for standing up for the voiceless, for being a woman who doesn't obey men with badges." By 6:00 p.m., the DOJ had issued a joint press statement confirming formal charges and an expedited timeline for federal hearings. The temperature in the nation didn't rise. It boiled. Protests erupted in downtown Chicago, Seattle, and Atlanta. Some peaceful, some chaotic. Hashtags flooded the networks. Hashtag Defy ICE trended beside new one above, the law. Tom Homan watched it all unfold from a quiet office, sipping coffee files stacked high around him. "We did the right thing," Pam Bondi said, entering without knocking. "I know," Tom said, "but the right thing always wakes up the wrong people." He turned toward the window. "They're going to paint Baraka as a martyr." "He made himself a martyr," Pam corrected. "We just published the truth." In the basement of the DOJ, Alina Habba was preparing for pre-trial motions. Her team had reviewed hours of footage, 600 pages of encrypted logs and testimony transcripts. "There's no room for ambiguity," she told her aides. "We're not arguing policy. We're presenting law. This isn't a referendum. It's an indictment." Her phone buzzed. A message from DHS. Another rally had turned violent in Philadelphia. Bottles thrown, federal vehicles tagged, chants echoing the same words Baraka had screamed, "Burn before we bow." Alina looked up. "Schedule the first hearing for next Tuesday. I want the public to see everything." Outside camera crews lined the steps of every courthouse in the Northeast. By midnight, the storm had gone national. Senators took sides. Civil rights groups filed amicus briefs. ICE issued an internal statement reaffirming lawful protocols. And behind closed doors, members of the House committee received threats. Pam Bondi received a voicemail. "You think you're protecting America. You're just fueling the fire." Tom received a letter, no return address, typed on a manual machine. "If Baraka falls, cities burn." He placed it in a folder. "Evidence," he muttered. The next morning, on the steps of the Capitol, a protester lit a subpoena replica on fire. Dozens cheered. Then the crowd parted as a federal vehicle pulled up. A marshal stepped out. "Is this how it ends?" the protester shouted. "No," the marshal said. "This is how accountability begins." The courthouse in Washington buzzed like a hornet's nest. Helicopters hovered above their engines, humming a steady warning. The sidewalks were blocked off by barricades and uniformed officers. Protesters and media crews tangled just behind the lines, waving signs and snapping images. Inside courtroom 8D, filled with observers and officials alike. No one was neutral anymore. The trial of Ras J. Baraka L., Monica McIver, and Letitia James had become a national referendum on the rule of law. Judge Ellison, a sharp-eyed jurist with 30 years on the bench, entered the room with quiet authority. "Bring in the defendants," he said. Baraka entered first, still projecting defiance, dressed in a dark, tailored suit. McIver followed, jaw, locked eyes, scanning the crowd. Letitia James appeared last, slower, solemn, her reputation trailing her like smoke. Alina Habba stood ready at the prosecution's table, her voice as calm as a sharpened blade. "Your Honor," she began, "this is not a trial of ideology, it is a trial of actions. What happened in Newark was not protest, it was planned, coordinated, and executed in defiance of federal authority." She paused, clicking a remote. Screens lit up Baraka waving people forward. McIver striking an officer. Letitia's encrypted logs. "These aren't opinions," Alina continued. "They are facts. On this footage, you will see the Constitution stepped on, literally and figuratively." Baraka's attorney rose. The mayor was exercising his First Amendment rights. "Not on federal ground," Judge Ellison interrupted. McIver's lawyer argued political targeting. Letitia James's counsel attempted to redirect attention to her track record, but the evidence stacked higher than rhetoric. The prosecution brought in witnesses, officers, analysts, local journalists who'd caught the Newark breach from rooftops. Each one cemented the timeline, the coordination, the refusal to stand down. Then came the body cam footage again. The jury winced. The nation watching via live stream gasped collectively. Alina's final words hit like steel. They didn't just defy orders, they tested whether the law would blink. "And today, we must answer. The defense closed with a call for compassion, for political unity, for understanding of civil disobedience, but the chamber wasn't swayed. Not after the videos. Not after the encryption logs. Not after the federal agent's testimony. The jury deliberated for 16 hours across 2 days. On the morning of the third day, the verdicts were read. Guilty Baraka, criminal trespass obstruction, contempt of Congress. Guilty MacGyver, federal assault, incitement obstruction. Guilty James, obstruction of justice, unlawful interference with federal process. Sentencing was set for 30 days out. Outside, the protests surged again, but this time muted by the finality of legal closure. Tom Homan stood outside the courthouse. Press gathered around. This was never about ICE, he said. It was about accountability. The Constitution doesn't bend for hashtags or headlines. Today, it stood firm. He turned and walked away, Pam Bondi beside him, briefcases in hand. Letitia James stared ahead as she was led to a vehicle. Her face betrayed nothing. Baraka lowered his head for the first time in days. MacGyver looked directly at the camera, whispered, "This isn't over." But for now, it was. Later that night, as lights dimmed in Washington and cities simmered in a strange hush, Tom sat at his desk. He looked at the final transcript, the video clips, the photographs of subpoenas stomped and laws defied. He closed the folder, wrote one sentence on the cover: "Rule of law tested, survived."